I find it almost ironic that as someone who's lived in New York for a long time, I don't really get to appreciate the city. I mean, in terms of its skyscrapers, its landscape, its environment, the subway system, beautiful, state of the art. It's perfect. I mean, there's nothing else like it, kind of. And yet, a lot of people trash talk about it. And look at this place. It's one of the best train stations in the city, I mean. Of course, this video isn't going to be me just sort of highlighting the good of the MTA, although maybe someone should make a video like that. But I'm gonna go through 3 parts in this video, where one will be the brief history of how we got here with the increased privatization of the New York City subway system, as well as what the MTA is, and maybe possible suggestions through the last part, or solutions of some interesting problems or obstacles that people put forth, which we'll see if I even do that. To be completely serious though, we do have to get through some pretty dark New York City history. And the history of it is so dark just because in the 1970s, New York City was going through kind of like a budget crisis, which would be later known as the all-encompassing fiscal crisis. But what in the hell is a fiscal crisis? And why was it so crucial that New York City got it under control? And how did that lead to the MTA? Well, starting since 1961, New York City was actually coming up on annual deficits of more than $100 million. And by 1970, the city was outright bankrupt from the past 2 decades, where it received a huge economic boom from post-World War II era. This is the same era that saw record low tuition rates in colleges, the famous building of the Highway State Act, as well as, well, record low everything. Nothing was really inflated, and homeowners could afford houses around $1,000 from the GI Bill. But by 1975, the city went into a full-out fiscal crisis. Parks everywhere like Central Park, even Williamsburg, as well as Bryant Park were actually in poor maintenance, and many public services were getting cut. Many investors had already frozen their assets in the city, and of course, city officials had every right to panic if the city was going into a deficit. And Times Square was running rampant with trash, litter, many parks weren't even maintained, and you have the old white flight occurring at the same exact time as primarily Midtown and downtown were becoming decrepit. Then how would you be able to sort of keep your investors in place at the same time that the image of the city was getting heavily influenced by crime everywhere, rampant from the Bronx all the way down to Staten Island? Now, it's not to say that New York did not seek out help. It did actually call upon then President Ford to bail them out, essentially. However, Ford declined, saying that New York City had every ounce of responsibility to get its own self out of the situation that it basically made up. And in the New York City subway, it wasn't any better. Since 1904, with the tokens that it used to have, New York City really hadn't updated much of their subway networks. There wasn't much maintenance in the waiting areas of the subway system, neither in the tunnels or even on the tracks. Of course, it is important to note that President Ford did eventually give some relief to the city, but this was a pivotal moment because it led to an increase of privatization. Essentially, many politicians and lawmakers saw that, okay, New York City is literally cooked right now. It's cooked. It's done. It's done. It's basically on fire. And while we've tried the welfare state, New York State seems to be going bankrupt from the public services that it's had, in the past 20 years. What has become of the city through state funding alone? And this has basically, this did lead to more private companies, firms, such as the creation of the MTA being put into the subway, because by then, even with riders using tokens and sort of using the MTA frequently, it came up deficit every year since the 1950s, which was a huge alarm to many lawmakers, especially if you're the mayor of New York, trying to get revenue up and, the image to still be that of a prosperous city.
But what exactly is the MTA? It's not technically listed as this private company, and it works with the state of New York, but it also doesn't. So how is it that the MTA is able to sort of work within the state and is an example of privatization? Because we're not talking about a company like Barclays or even MetLife. We're not talking about the company like Amazon. We're not talking about it in that sense. We are talking about this separate entity that's able to avoid taxation within the state and yet also really do a good job at helping out New Yorkers being transported and carrying different lines, as well as maintaining different forms of transportation such as rail, buses, etc. And this is where we segue more into the second part of the video. So yeah, about to go out into the abyss. We're gonna go to the 여기가 내 집이야.
Man, it's such a nice day to be a neoliberal, right? So it's really interesting that the MTA isn't really defined as a firm. Technically, it's called an independent corporation. And it's really smart that it's doing that, because it makes the situation between the governor and the MTA, the governor of New York State and the MTA, really complicated, where the governor is able to appoint up to 6 of the 14 members of the board for the MTA. However, they can appoint, but sometimes once they appoint them, they can't really do anything to fire them, and then the members themselves don't have to actually report to the governor. So basically, if any of the board members, especially the head, if the head is appointed, they usually serve about 4 to 5 years. But if the governor changes from, let's say, Democrat to Republican, or just simply changes authority, then they have no power to fire them or give them any instructions for what types of projects they have. This makes it a really complicated relationship for the governor, because he might say that, oh, well, we need another project of around, let's say back in 2016, where they needed a $2 billion project for the LIRR. And the MTA was like, well, we're kind of sort of, strapped for cash. Where are we going to get the money? And so this really creates a lot of tension, really difficult patterns of conversation, doesn't really leave any room for negotiation. But that's really like the smart part for the MTA, in my opinion. And when I say the MTA is clever, they are clever. They are smart. It's almost ingenious that they're able to still be funded by the state of New York. However, they don't really have to abide by any of the rules that the governor says, or even the taxpayer themselves say, hey, we want, cleaner, for why not, better, trains and carts, which I don't know why would you want to. But hey, like if they wanted, then the MTA doesn't really have to follow their rules. They can just do their own thing. So next time when the New York Times or some other news outlet says that the ingenious plan to bring in a National Guard into New York City was all part of the governor's idea, most likely it was not. Most likely. This is why much of the beautiful scenery is still kept. I mean, if the governor wanted to take away some of the aesthetics of the stations that we have now, then imagine. We'd be in pure chaos. We're so glad that the MTA doesn't have to abide, doesn't have to kneel down to no governor out here. As if we democratically elect them anyways, right? And so with this, because I am truly the most unbiased person in the world.
Who the hell needs bullet trains like in Japan? When you have that piece of...
I will, to just propel my unbiased impartiality, I'm going to basically interview some of my fellow, I would say, acquaintances, friends, cohort members, and really anybody that I could honestly find to give me their opinion on the MTA. But of course, I also recognize the privilege I have at being at Columbia University, as I am very thrilled to have the resources and knowledge that I do have of the MTA. Besides, what is more neoliberal? I mean, you can't think of anything that is not any more neoliberal than me having the freedom in this country to go and interview random individuals, as well as individuals that I just know, to get a completely unbiased take.
So, in a few words, what's your opinion on the New York City subway system?
Dangerous and scary.
I love the subway system. I obviously think there's a lot of I know there's a lot of controversy with it right now in terms of protection, but
It stinks.
It's nice because it goes everywhere, but it needs to be improved.
Have you seen that video of the guy getting shot by his own gun because he was fighting this other guy, and then he got stabbed by the lady behind him, and he got even angrier and he pulled out his gun, and then he got shot by his own gun?
I think if we look at it positively compared to other public transits in the United States, I think, we gotta be happy with what we have.
I think it's very practical for New York City being so chaotic and so big. It always has like room for improvement, and it's dirty.
It sucks.
But I love it.
Absolutely 100% sucks. Why are the prices rising?
Smelly? Too much pee? There needs to be more regulation in the people that are there, because that shit scares me, bro. You see people who are sagging their pants so low, I can see their ass.
Why does it always stink? Why is there a homeless dude taking up every single, like a whole bench?
You need to have more police there that's in the lower levels. I'm not talking the higher. I'm talking the lower levels.
On almost every single car. And also, what is with that new design?
Hole and pants sagging in that specific order. So put this as my request to the New York government to put more police there.
Like, what am I supposed to do when it stinks? Like, the entire car is just, it's like the entire subway train is gonna stink. Like, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to escape?
And less ammonia, less urea, and more sanitizations.
It's well connected in that you can get anywhere in the city. Some other places don't have a well connected metro system.
So much, like literally. I go there every other weekend, and I'm always waiting like almost 20 minutes for the A train. Also, it's like really dirty. And honestly, why are we paying $2.90? Yeah, the rats. Why are we paying $2.90 for trains that are not even gonna come at the time that they're supposed to come?
But I think the New York MTA suffers from efficiency and just like low quality. It needs to be upgraded, and also security concerns are big.
And like the whole thing about the open concept, absolutely not. Like the open concept trains, I hate that. How are we gonna get away from the crackers? Sorry, but no, it's not working for me. It's not.
Right? Like, I don't know. It sucks. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's convenient because I can like jump the turnstile and go wherever I need to. But
All the first place when you're just doing it. When you did it one time, you get this. But there's a point you gotta do it. So same exact process for basic and you get broken down.
No, because it's not something. Let me say. It is very dirty. It is very annoying, but it can also be very convenient in terms of payments, right? You know, your metro card, you got your right? Very convenient. I pretty much go across all of Manhattan. I don't use it outside of Manhattan, so I wouldn't really know. Another problem is that I feel unsafe. Generally speaking, I feel unsafe. I don't like it. Because it's very crowded, it's very confined, there's not enough exit points, although that can really be helped because it's like a subway, there's only so many places you can put an exit. But yeah, that's my opinion.
So in order to conclude, if I were to be critical of this operation by the MTA, I would say that despite the MTA being this private corporation that has essentially made it easy for it, to sort of have some sort of standardized method of payment, or if people like that, they're implementing more rail lines, easier forms of transportation. I would say, however, that based on Slobodian's whole argument with neoliberalism and laissez-faire corporations, would be basically that despite, of course, there being a decentralization of this power and the government not interfering with anything has resulted in the MTA jacking up prices for the subway, and despite them jacking up the prices, increasing it by 40%, especially now with the $2.90 ticketing, we do see that despite the counter argument being that, oh, it could be inefficient with more regulation, it's becoming inefficient because of the conditions that the subways are in, where they're deteriorating or they're falling apart. And in a sense, it doesn't really help when prices in New York City, based on this neoliberal position and transition in the 70s, it sort of has put a lot of New Yorkers in the forefront where maybe they have to jump the turnstile because they do not have the means to pay for their Metro card, or essentially after a few rides, especially if they take multiple stops, it all adds up. $2.90 adds up eventually. If you're using it, let's say 4 times, that's more than $10 a day times 5, which is 50. 50 times 4 weeks, that's easily $200 that someone could potentially save. Aside from Slobodian's contribution, we can also pertain this to one of the classes readings on Wendy Brown's Neoliberalism's Frankenstein, where, in a sense, because the governor eventually can't even fire some of the board members that they even themselves recommend into the MTA. I mean, sort of the MTA becomes an entity by itself using taxpayer money, but sometimes not even putting up their own end of the bargain. And so it becomes this weird situation where there is a freedom of this private entity, but it's not really any more freedom for even the taxpayer, in the sense where they may think that their money is going to a useful cause, but when the station at 1/16 is falling apart from degradation and it's continuously being flooded by, increasing amounts of storms from climate change or just inadequate storm drainage, then it really doesn't add up to a good substantial cause. And so in the end, I think we need to really reevaluate the way that the MTA does its business and how it sort of navigates itself to using money and to sort of cooperating with the New York State government and the New York City government to have better regulations and much better service for its people. This is what I would say if I was critical.